Yeah. Hi, it's Mo. It is July 7th. It is Tuesday, and I've finished 2 more books in July. I finished Course Barbie by Geen Rocero. I was reading this all through June. It took me a while to get through. This is Gina's memoir growing up in the Philippines as a very feminine child, and how she quickly realized that she was different in that she was a woman and she was a girl. How her family, because of the traditions in the Philippines, didn't make her feel bad for this. She did suffer a lot of racial slurs and a lot of discrimination when she was younger, a lot of teasing, a lot of bullying because of her feminine ways and because she didn't hide them. But there was this like whole double standard where she grew up, when she grew up, about how the culture in the Philippines had always recognized third genders or non-binary people or people who didn't fit into a gender binary before colonization, but after colonization and forced Catholicism, essentially, the nation rebelled against queer people and against trans people, but they still upheld some love for them in some ways. So there are like trans pageants, and they were called like gay pageants when Gina was a child. Gina quickly becomes part of that world and takes over the pageant world in the area of the Philippines where she lived. So she gets all this notoriety when she's young for being a pageant girl, and then when she's older, she gets the opportunity to move to America. Her mother is living in America, so she goes there with the idea that she's going to get better understanding and more gender-affirming care. But in some ways, Gina did not have better understanding because trans people were even more mistreated and abused and misunderstood in America. But she was able to get better gender-affirming care, and she was able to get gender reassignment surgery and all of those good things that were important to Gina's upbringing and to her becoming the woman that she always knew she was going to grow into. And then how she started modeling and how she became a, what she calls stealth model, a person who hid her tea, hid her transness, what that did to her psychologically, what that did to her emotionally, how she was able to live more freely in the US in some ways and get the care that she needed, but in other ways she had to hide even more who she was. And it was just about her whole life over time. And as she grew up, she realized that instead of pretending to be a cis woman, she really needed to embrace her trans womanness and to speak about it and to become an advocate for trans women and trans people and queerness and non-binary all around the world. So she did things like had a TED Talk and went to talk various places, like she spoke in front of President Obama, and she still speaks today, and she still runs organizations and works with organizations that help trans people, and she still models. She was the first openly trans, she was one of the first openly trans models to be a Playboy playmate. So other openly trans models have been in Playboy, but she was a playmate, whatever that means. I don't really remember. I used to read Playboy when I was a kid, or when I was younger, not when I was a kid. I never read it that intently or understood the hierarchy of Playboy. But anyway, so this was a really interesting memoir. I'm super glad to have read it. I don't know if Gina had like a co-author in this or a ghostwriter, or if she wrote this herself. One of the flaws I had with this was like the very simplistic language that was used in some respects, but then the kind of writing that wants to be very literary, wants to be very flowery, wants to be very descriptive. Like it just felt very much like a novice writer. And that didn't bother me so much, but I do feel like this was a little bit of a rose-tinted memoir. And I've read memoirs before like that I find to be like not good. In my mind, at least, the impetus for that in this story is to not dwell on the many, many negative things that happened during Gina's life. Because she does talk about negative things that happened to her. She talks about being bullied. She talks about the potential danger that she had dating men, both in the Philippines and in America. She talks about the potential danger of being outed constantly. And she talks about the mental stress of that, you know, the physical fear, the worry and everything. But she does it in a very glossed over kind of manner. And I think that that's partly because that's just the life that she led, and she had to do that, and she had to survive, and she had to come through it. But I also think that this memoir feels like she didn't want to say anything too bad and shed too much of a light on the negative aspects of transness and the trans experience, because that's the kind of salacious nature that people want, because that's some of the things that turn people off to transness, because of whatever her reasons may have been. It just felt like it was a little rose tinted, and that she didn't really share every aspect of her life. Now, I felt the same way about Pamela Anderson's memoir, and similarly, I think, like, even though Pamela Anderson does mention being sexually assaulted and things like that, she didn't like dwell on it. I felt the same way as that book, that I understand why it was written the way it was. It did leave the reader, it left me as the reader feeling like I wasn't getting the whole story, like I wasn't getting the whole truth necessarily. And that makes you wonder, like, what are the parts that are true? What are the parts that are getting cut on the editing floor? What are the parts that they're not telling you? I don't know, it just seemed a little too good to be true in some aspects. But again, like, I get it. I get why, in both those memoirs, why they did that. And I liked both the memoirs. I think I would have liked this a lot more if I could have read it on audio. I would have loved, especially if Gina read this herself, I would have loved to have heard that, because that's something that I really, really loved about the Pamela Anderson memoir. I loved hearing it in her own words. You know, her writing, her words, her story. I always think that's a great way to read memoirs. But I did really enjoy this, and I'm very happy to have read it. The next book that I finished so far this week was What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Fredrick Douglass. This was a speech that he gave to a women's community or something, and he read this speech on July 5th, 1852, and I read this on July 5th, 2026. And this is a speech that he was asked to read at an abolitionist group, at like a ladies' auxiliary kind of abolitionist group, about slavery and what the 4th of July means to a former slave. Fredrick Douglass, if you don't know, was an enslaved man who was enslaved in the South, and he escaped slavery. I think he was also in like Maryland and Delaware and other more southern states, and then he escaped slavery and went to New York and Connecticut, and he became a huge abolitionist, obviously, against slavery, but also he became a public speaker. He became a symbol of the truth of what slavery is, because at that time people still thought that Black people and enslaved people were ignorant, were unable to learn, were animals. A lot of people, and certainly a lot of people in the North, who didn't maybe directly deal with slavery but had heard about slavery. Fredrick Douglass, being a young enslaved boy, he didn't know how to read or write. He taught himself how to read and write, and he became this public figure, this public speaker, and kind of a beacon of hope of slavery. And this was just like a banger, because he talks about, like, what does it mean to me? And it's a scathing review of the United States and of the practice of the 4th of July and of being asked to talk about this. He talks about how the idea of the Declaration of Independence was a great idea and that the intention behind it seemed good. Obviously now we know some of the intention wasn't quite as good as we originally thought, or the American people originally thought, and then obviously we know that it can be twisted and turned and interpreted in many ways to fit whatever your agenda happens to be, and one of those agendas is continued oppression. So he says here, what to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. So a lot of this speech obviously is about slavery and the juxtaposition of the American dream and the American way and the sentiment and idea of the Constitution versus how slaves were actually treated, how enslavement actually worked, because that was kind of Fredrick Douglass's thing. He was like, I'm going to tell you how it actually works. But it can be absolutely translated to today, and it is completely relevant to today and to the oppression and to the bigotry, racism, homophobia, transphobia, womenphobia of the Americas that we know today. So just two other like quick quotes that could be translated to today. He's talking about the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and he says they were brave men. They loved their country better than their own interests. And though this is not the highest form of human excellence, we all will concede that it is a rare virtue and it ought to command respect. So, you know, we don't have that today. People on a certain side of the political party likes to say that they want to uphold the Declaration of Independence, but they absolutely do not. And then this is my favorite part. I had to print this out. I listened to it on audio, but I wanted to print it out. This is the one that really got me. It says, "Go where you may, search where you will, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, you will say that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival." So yeah, scathing speech given in 1852, still relevant today. If you have not read this one, I highly recommend it, but I would also definitely highly recommend reading the autobiography of Fredrick Douglass, which is his slave narrative, which is his story of enslavement and his story of how he sought freedom at all costs and every cost, and it's really eye-opening and amazing. So just remember that while we're celebrating the country. Speaking of Ladies Auxiliary, on Thursday I'm going to go to the Ladies Auxiliary book sale. This is the book sale in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, that they put on every year. On Thursday night, there's a $5 preview night. So you pay $5 to get in, and then the books are usually like, hardcovers are usually $2, softcovers are $1. I'm going to try and be really selective with what I purchase and what I bring home. Really, really, really for sure after that, I'm going to try to not go to any more book sales with the intention of getting a lot of books. Now, I'm going to go to the Wall Library sale when they have it again because the paperback selection was so good. I went to it a couple of weeks ago and I found so many good vintage paperbacks. So I am going to go to that, and I am going to try and buy vintage paperbacks, but I'm not going to try and buy like anything to add to my like actual TBR. I am going to buy stuff at the Ladies Auxiliary. Yes, 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 I am. But I'm going to try and be selective, be intentional with my purchases. And I am going to Ohio in a couple of weeks, so I will also probably look for some mass market paperbacks there because there's a couple I know used bookstores that have a good selection of Agatha Christie. So I'm gonna make a list before I go and try to get the books that I don't have already in mass market paperback. My Agatha Christie collection will never be complete because I want to get lots of vintage, like I want all the different coverways, and what I would ultimately love to have at some point is like a full collection, all the coverways. But there are a couple like A Caribbean Mystery and Nemesis that I don't have at all in mass market paperback, so I would really like to get those. You'll come along with me this week to that preview sale, and then I might go the next morning because the preview sale is usually so busy that I can't even like think too hard, and I don't usually get too many books at the preview sale. So I usually go the next day too, and by the time I get there it's a little bit picked over, but I like to go and I like to just see if I missed anything. So I'll take you along with me, and when I read some more this week, I will let you know. Yeah.
Hopefully these are just canted down just because the rain will go off.
Hopefully. That for you. Hi, it's been a little bit of a whirlwind. I have not talked to you since going to the Ladies Auxiliary book sale. And usually I save books and I do like a little haul here and I try to show you some of the books that I got, but I put them all away already and I don't know which ones they are already. So, I mean, I do know, of course, because I have my wrap spreadsheet, my recently acquired book spreadsheet where I write down every book that comes into the house. But what I mean is I put all the books away. I only got like 20 books, which is for me very low, and very specifically did not go back because the Ladies Auxiliary book sale is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and the preview day is Thursday. That's the day I went to, so you pay $5. So I got, I think like actually like 23 books. Altogether, it was like $38. So I think it worked out to like $1.50, $1.60 a book. Not bad. And then they have it on Friday morning and Saturday morning. But I specifically did not go those days because I have to stop buying books. Like, I just have so many books, and I'm feeling overwhelmed with all the books that I have, and I'm feeling like I just don't need more. And actually, we had some flooding. There were some severe storms at the beginning of the week. We had some flooding in the basement, and it made me think that I actually am going to go through my basement box books again and get rid of some of the books that I've been keeping since my basement box book series, which I will leave down below, thinking that eventually I'll get to. But things like Neil Gaiman, like, I don't really read Neil Gaiman anymore. I like the Neil Gaiman that I've read. Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett is one of my all-time favorite books. But like, am I really gonna read all those Neil Gaimans? And even if I am, I can always get them again. I have this idea that I'm keeping things, and then I'm saving things, and then I'm protecting things. But the truth is, like, those books are just regular books. They're not like vintage, they're not special, they're not cool. So like, I could just get them again. Now, my vintage sci-fis, my mass market paperbacks, obviously those I wouldn't be getting rid of, but I think I could go through and get rid of quite a bunch of books, especially ones that I can find easily at library sales, especially ones that I can find easily used at used bookstores and things like that. But the whole point is that I've just been going to so many sales over the last 4 or 5 years, and I've been collecting so many books, and now I read a lot of books, which is awesome, but I need to cool it until I feel like my TBR has come back into equilibrium. So the thing is, like, I like to have a huge TBR. Like, I like to have a lot of books on my TBR. I like to have like my own personal library that I can pick from, my own personal bookstore that I can pick from, but it's just too much at the moment, and it feels overwhelming. So that's why I'm also doing like my Try a Chapter project, which I do keep adding books to try a chapter. I did buy one book at the Ladies Auxiliary book sale that I wasn't sure about, so I will be trying a chapter of that one. Going forward, I think I will just be going to book sales, looking for like mass market paperbacks, looking for very specific books, and buying very few books if possible. I would like to keep paring it down until I really come away with like not many at all. And it's not really a money thing because that's the only hobby I spend money on. You know, the money doesn't hurt. Like, it would be nice to spend less as well. We had those crazy storms, and you might have seen it on the news, like Asbury Park was flooded. Then I've just been working a lot. I did take a new position at my job that requires me to work some more hours, and I'm just trying to get into the groove of doing that because I'm not very good at self-discipline, so trying to do that. I have been reading, but I didn't finish anything else this week. I have like 5 or 6 books on the go. I keep getting books out from the library on Libby or Hoopla and then not finishing them and moving on to something else, but I'm still reading them, but like, I'm like, oh, this doesn't fit my mood right now, so I'm gonna read this instead. Or a new release came out that I want to read, so I'm gonna read that first, which is not the way I usually do things, but I do find my reading is like cyclical, and every once in a while I will read that way. So I haven't finished anything else this week, but I have a lot that I'm currently reading, so next week I will definitely have read more. Let me know what you've been reading this week. Let me know if you read any of the books that I mentioned here. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!